Creation Commission, helping shape Ethiopia's employment policies from within government. IGC's work also helped inform the livelihoods component of the World Bank's Urban Productive Safety Net project in Ethiopia. Finally, the research showed the need for better labor market data and data systems. IGC-funded work informed thinking around the labor market information system, an online job portal. And IGC researchers contributed to technical updates in private sector systems, helping them work more efficiently.
Applying for jobs required job seekers to come to the cities, look at job boards, but now they can, from the comfort of their home, use their phone, put their attributes in that system, and look for the job that they're looking for.
Today, Ethiopia takes a broader approach to this policy issue, building more developed institutional infrastructure to tackle the root causes of unemployment. The IGC played a key role in this shift, not just by producing rigorous research, but by helping the government reframe the real challenges.
Excellent. Good to see some of the work there that we're doing in Ethiopia in particular. For this second panel, though, I'm delighted to be joined by Rachel Glenister, President of the Centre for Global Development, Karen van den Houten, Head of Sustainability for Livelihoods at Unilever, Asif Salah, Executive Director of BRAC, and Mavis Afuso-Jafami, we sorted that earlier, I think, President and CEO of the African Centre for Economic Transformation. Rachel Glenister, you've worked extensively on how evidence translates into policy, which is something that we do at the IGC as well. Is the current global system actually fit to respond to the shocks we've been talking about today and the pace that they're happening?
Short answer is no. As you say, we've just been talking about the shocks of COVID, and also if you think about the disruption in rich countries and elsewhere, the China shock is still, it's a long-term shock, but it's had big impacts. And there have been a series of technological shocks, and what all of these have shown us in the past is that labour markets do respond eventually, but the adjustment is painful and somewhat slow. So what is effective is having, supporting workers through that adjustment and helping them have transferable skills and benefits. And unfortunately, our current system is the opposite. We have non-portable skills and non-portable benefits. So in most of the world, only about 20% of the population of workers are working in the formal sector, and often benefits like unemployment benefit are tied to your job in the formal sector, and the 80% of people who are outside the formal sector don't have any support when the shock comes. But it's exactly those people who are the most likely to be faced to suffer during a shock. And so one of the things that we need to do is create social support for the informal sector that is responsive to shock. So shock responsive social protection is what we call it. So you can have people's phone numbers, and then when a shock hits, you can send them money directly on their mobile phones. I mean, BRAC is a great example of a place that does, working with informal sector and providing support to them. So the shocks that are coming, AI, demographic change, climate change, I think there's a lot of talk about AI, but to be honest, we don't actually know very much about exactly what it's going to do to labour markets. What's shocking is the fact that we do know that demographic transformation is going to happen and climate change is going to happen, but those we're not preparing for. So what can we do? Well, we heard about migration earlier in the last session, because the shock is going to mean that there are many fewer young workers in most of the world, but Africa is going to see a lot more young workers. And so obviously having the kind of planned, skilled migration that we were hearing about in the last session is really important. The other thing is we need to train workers in basic fundamental skills, not in specific skills, because they need to be able to change job as they will during their time. And I've just come from the Education World Forum where ministers were talking about, well, we're going to train people in AI and we're going to train people in coding. That's exactly the wrong approach, right? Because AI is, you know, at the moment is exactly replacing people who have coding skills. What you need is workers with really good math and literacy so that they can change and be flexible to the new challenges as they come.
That's fascinating because I think so many people are pinning their hopes on AI being a solution to so many things, and as you say, that's not the one-size-fits-all answer. But if you had to prioritise one reform that could unlock scale quickly, what might it be?
So I'm going to cheat and go for two.
Okay.
So migration, you know, planned migration and the kind of skills partnerships we're talking about, and better foundational learning, because in a lot of the world, you know, you don't have those basic skills that will allow you to be more flexible.
Interesting. Karen van den Houten, Unilever operates across complex global supply chains and markets. Where do you see the biggest risks to labour stability, and how are you building resilience around that?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for the invitation by FCDO. Really appreciate it, and I'm very delighted to be here, especially in such amazing company. For those of you who don't know Unilever, we are one of the world's leading global suppliers of beauty and well-being, home care, personal care, and foods products, including leading global brands like Vaseline, Cif, and Dove. Unilever has a very long history of sustainability, and we currently focus our efforts on four key areas. One is climate, one is plastics, nature, and also livelihoods. And all of that work is really underpinned by respect for human rights. So for a business of our scale, one of the risks that we specifically see related to labor stability is around really structural inequalities in global supply chains. In many markets, workers, particularly those in upstream manufacturing as well as in agriculture, really don't earn enough to make a decent standard of living. So at Unilever, we are really working to improve livelihoods for all of those who are growing, making and selling our products, and that includes support for income growth for smallholder farmers. That includes working to really drive living wage for the employees of our suppliers, and that also includes working with small-scale retailers to really improve their businesses and grow their businesses. So when wages fall short, there are really some unintended consequences. Those include low productivity, it also includes higher turnover, and we also see associated human rights risks. So we see living wage not just as a social issue, but also as a foundational driver for supply chain resilience, really. What we found is that closing that gap between minimum wage and living wage is a really effective way to build stability in supply chains. And when workers receive a fair pay and they have more secure incomes, we see that that really strengthens supply chains and makes them more stable, and it also improves productivity. So what Unilever does is we really embed living wage in the expectations of our suppliers, both in our what we call our responsible partner policy, which is our supplier code of conduct, as well as through a living wage promise. So we're asking suppliers to sign a living wage promise so that they measure the gap and that they actually develop a time-bound plan to close it. But setting expectations is not enough. So one of our key insights is that suppliers really need practical support. They need to understand what a living wage is and what it means to them. They need access to data that really helps them measure the gap. And what they also need is really practical solutions on how to implement the living or close the living wage gap in a way that actually is commercially viable for their business. And that's why Unilever partners with organizations like AIM Progress and IDH to really develop supplier capability building programs specifically on the topic of living wage. And then maybe finally, scale really matters. If living wage is just a niche requirement of one company, we see that that sometimes leads to friction. That's why we sort of combine our approach and our commitment to living wage with broader advocacy and also with really collaborating with others to really level the playing field and to drive adoption of living wage more broadly. And we do that in collaboration with organizations like ILO and UN Global Compact. So maybe just a concluding remark, but to make labor markets more resilient, we think work must provide a decent livelihood, and we think that the living wage debate is key.
That's really fascinating. I wanted to ask you, though, I mean, you're here, it's an FCDO conference, we've heard from government ministers, so if you could ask what change governments could make that would significantly improve labour market resilience, what one or two things would you ask for?
Yeah. I think I've heard some comments earlier today in some of the plenaries around this as well. And I think it's important to mention that these types of systemic inequalities, including the gap between minimum wage and living wage, they're not addressed by one actor alone. Company action is critical, but we also cannot do this on our own. So we really need all actors within the system to take their responsibility, and I think, of course, governments are very crucial in bringing this agenda forward. So if we could ask governments for two things, then the first would be for them to, over time, raise wages from minimum wage to living wage levels. And secondly is for them to strengthen the systems that we need to make the implementation of living wage possible. So if I elaborate a bit more on the first one, raising wages closes the gap. It also improves livelihoods, and it really creates a level playing field across industries. And if so reflecting on the Doha declaration, the political declaration last year, that's really where governments, they really emphasized that living wage is necessary for decent work, but also for an inclusive growth agenda. So if I reflect on the second one, priority now should really be on implementation. We need strong wage setting mechanisms, we need social dialogue, and we also need clear pathways towards living wage to unlock impact at scale. So what we need as a business is really clarity on policies. That's really critical to align incentives across governments, across businesses, and across supply chains. So yeah, I'll reiterate what I said before, but if we want resilient labor markets, we really need to move from isolated action to really more systems change, and we think that living wage is key to that. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we're getting the ministers together here to try and make progress on some of these issues. Asif Salah-Brak works directly with communities facing climate shocks. What does labour market disruption look like on the ground, and what interventions do you see that are helping people to adapt?
Well, let me start with a little bit like a quick story. And one of the riverine islands of Bangladesh I recently visited, and it's also adversely affected by climate change. And the situation is so poor that there is no roads, so I had to get on a cart, like bull-driven cart, right? I was walking, taking the cart back, and then suddenly I see a woman comes running behind my car and chasing me. And then she comes in, I ask the cart to stop, and then she gives me this like almost torn piece of paper, and I open that up, I see a CV written in broken English. And she says that I'm a farmer's wife. You guys all taught me to send our children to school, and I invested a lot of money in my children's education, my son's education. And he just graduated out of university 2 years ago. He doesn't have a job. And he doesn't want to do agriculture as well because he's educated. And that's an interesting reality as well, that, you know, if you remember during the MDG era, we all strove, like, we need to send our kids to school, right? And with that whole idea that growth will come, and then we're going to ensure jobs and a good life for them. And suddenly now we are down with so many young people who have gone to universities, who have gone to colleges, got educated, and there's absolutely no jobs. And climate is just one of the sort of disruptors, right? But and again, I think, you know, a lot of people think that, so for example, take the case of Bangladesh we operate. we are projected to lose about 17% of our land by 2047, which is about 22 years from now. And it's not like that. I think conventional wisdom is that suddenly one fine morning in 2047, we're going to see our 17% land goes away. That's not the case, right? It's a slow onset disaster. Every day things happen. And whether it's salinity creeping in our coastlines, and we are seeing that, whether it's the heat stress, whether it's the flood, the irregular rainfall, and we are seeing that more and more, and to the point that, you know, not only on one hand that's causing livelihood changes, and when people talk about AI and its disruption, I mean, I laugh at it because 85% of our jobs, informal jobs, 50% of livelihoods come from agriculture and things like that. So AI disruption will take a long time, and not just in Bangladesh, in many other parts of other countries in Africa and where we work as well. So the focus actually has to go in these areas where it's climate-related disruptions are happening on how do we adapt? How do we kind of not make people move, right? It's not a coincidence that in Bangladesh, for example, 10 coastal districts have lost population, while Dhaka is now the second largest city in the world in terms of population, to 30 million, and projected to be the largest in terms of by 2050. So that what's happening? People are moving to the cities because of loss of livelihood, essentially. So what solutions are out there, right? So essentially, I think, I mean, the Bangladesh, for example, new government has come in and basically said that they're going to create 10 million jobs. At BRAC, we are saying that we are going to create about 1 million jobs because that is the number one thing, is jobs, jobs, jobs. And it's not your formal jobs that's going to come. I think we are kind of growing realization since COVID time, because there's year after year there's disruption happening, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine, now the Middle East war. 5 out of the 6 fertilizer companies are shut down in Dhaka, Bangladesh. We are anticipating a big food security crisis if the war doesn't end very soon. So what does that mean? That means very practical solutions, very sort of, on one hand, you would need to build resilience. So that means introducing more insurance schemes, and that's where we're really prioritizing reimagining microfinance, because we have microfinance network across the country. How we kind of pair up these kinds of new products like crop insurance, livelihood insurance, and livestock insurance, because that's the biggest asset for a lot of people, and roll it out. We have done about 1.5 million over the last 18 months, and that's starting to show dividends. That's on one side in terms of resilience. But how do we kind of reduce the cost of input for the farmers and increase linkages to the market, and also aggregate, because most of these farmers are smallholder farmers, right? So how do you increase the bargaining power? None of these are rocket science. None of these are super sexy, attractive solutions that you can show PowerPoint. It's good old-fashioned, back to basics work, require community to organize. And I think that's what we're going to do. We have committed about 1 million jobs. It's not an accident. But jobs are not, again, as I was saying, it's not factory growth driven. We are seeing agriculture as a big area to look at growth, look at consolidation, bring in mechanization, and increase, and anybody living in their households, any additional sources of income, whether it's planting trees, whether it's doing a small fish ponds, we are seeing that let's go ahead and do that, because we saw during COVID, the more families who had multiple sources of income, they had the biggest resilience. And that's what we are doing. So.
It's fascinating, but the scale of the number of jobs we need to create is quite mind-blowing, to be honest, the figures you're talking about. I mean, maybe we're hearing a lot of ambition here, but based on your experience across African economies, and I think I know what you're going to say to this, are we moving fast enough?
Can I echo Rachel and say no?
No, I do.
The answer is no, and I'd like to talk about 3 things, but let me put it in context. At Asset, we have these intergenerational dialogues. So you heard the young lady earlier on saying, don't just bring us on stage, engage us. So we have these intergenerational dialogues where we put young people with ministers as they are developing policies, etc. And we recently had one on the future of jobs and where they're going to come from. And a young man said, well, according to the statistics, he didn't quite say labor market, but according to the statistics in the labor market, I have a job, okay? But I work 84 hours a week. I don't have health insurance. I don't have a pension. And on a weekly basis, I struggle to get to and from work, okay? So research that we've been doing at Asset shows that it's no longer about quantity of work, it's about quality of work. It's about dignified work. And we are finding that in a lot of sectors that are generating real, like quick jobs, informal sector, agriculture, etc., and the service industry, a lot of these young people that we are counting in our numbers actually don't have decent and dignified work. So they tick the box, but they are struggling. They are living below the poverty line. And then, of course, when it comes to women, as Minister Chapman said earlier on, not only are they struggling to get even into the basics of jobs, but they are not actively participating in the labor market because of unpaid care responsibilities, etc. So the first thing I'd like to say is, no, we're not moving fast enough, because even though we are talking about creating more jobs and we're kind of patting ourselves on the back for the progress we've made, the quantity we have is not decent and it's not dignified. And if you are a 21-year-old sitting in Abuja and this is your future, it's not a very good one. The second one is also the structural nature of our investments. When we look at where the real jobs are coming from, you know, the decent and dignified jobs, we are seeing them in industries, we're seeing them in agri-processing, we're seeing them in, you know, companies that are linked to global value chains. And this requires an intentional and deliberate investment in industrial policy. Something that we are struggling to see. So even when governments are talking about wanting to invest in industrial policies, a lot of our partners still don't feel comfortable with the terminology around industrial policy. We're hearing that still. And how you define industrial policy, I think the latest one was we decided to even stop using industrial policy and start talking about value-added companies and manufacturing, etc. And then we have this thing looming on the horizon called AI and digital, etc. But I agree with Asif that, you know, if we get the foundations right, then it shouldn't actually be a threat. Right now, it seems like a threat, and it's probably a threat more in the global minority than it is in the global majority. But it could be a threat that doesn't happen to the global majority if we invest in the right way. And this takes me to my third point, which is the fiscal constraints that governments are working in. We didn't hear a lot of it on the earlier panel. We didn't hear about, you know, the fact that so many of our countries are spending more on debt servicing than they are spending on education and health. And I agree with Rachel when she says that if we don't invest in the fundamentals, we will not navigate the world of decent jobs today, let alone the world of AI. A lot of young people that are graduating do not have the basic skills, the basic mathematical, literal skills. They don't have the basic analytical thinking skills to navigate the current space of work, let alone the future of work. So when we talk about, you know, and earlier on I said, I feel for our government sometimes, because on the one hand, you're having to do this major debt servicing, and then on the other hand, you're being told that you're not investing enough in skills, okay? So, you know, we recently did some modeling at Asset, and we found that if we could cut debt servicing to 10%, 1.3 million more children would go to school in 21 African countries, primary school, basic education. I don't have the modeling for quality education, so don't ask me, Rich. We don't know. And I know bums on seats is not enough. It has to be quality education. So, you know, for me, we also need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is where is the room, where is the fiscal room for our governments to invest in these critical skills, to prepare our young people for jobs? Where is the room for them to lay the foundations for industrial policy that creates the space for companies that can generate decent jobs? And where is the room for taking issues to scale? The Minister for Germany talked earlier on about, you know, the work that they are doing in Egypt. They are doing similar work in Morocco and other North African countries. And we welcome it, but they are minor examples. They are not at scale. You know, the migration issue is still seen as a negative thing. So for me, when we talk about Africa's demography, you know, we have two options. It's either going to be a youthquake or it's going to be the world's greatest economic opportunity. For it to be the latter, we all need to commit to investing in it. And before you ask me what we need to do, you know, we need long-term investment, long-term commitment. We've got to stop this stop-starts. Structural transformation doesn't happen in 5 years. You know, it's a long-term 15 to 20-year investment. The question is the international community ready to walk that journey with us or not?
It's a big question, and we've got very little time left, but I do want to end this panel, if I can, on a sort of positive note. So I'm going to ask you all very briefly in a sentence or two, what could make the biggest difference now? We're talking about governments coming together, and it's beyond GDP. It's not just about investment. What would make the biggest difference, do you think, to resilience and growth?
I think we need to kind of all collectively, government and civil societies around the world need to identify a few priorities that they really need to come down and act together. And particularly, I think as the ODA financing is coming down quite dramatically, I think that's a wrong move in many ways. I think we need to, this is the time to double down rather than retreat. But that's the reality. But I think philanthropists has a role to play, but identify 2 or 3 big bet issues, whether it's climate adaptation, whether it's job creation, whether it's foundational literacy, which is very, very important, and go back to basics, right? Essentially, big bet, big delivery with the long-term vision, 20 years, 15, 20 years, because I think these are all investments and the returns are very high.
Excellent. Rachel.
So when shocks happen, people have a natural tendency to retreat and try and invest at home and, you know, secure things at home. That's, again, the exact opposite way. If there was one thing I would like us to do, is to reach out. So that means, you know, you get more resilience if you trade with larger number of countries, if you have people going backwards and forwards and remittances going backwards and forwards. So, you know, try new things, invest in innovation. So we need to go back to a more cooperative world where we have, for our own sakes, because that is the way to build resilience, is if we, so here's an example. In South Asia, you often see people deliberately marrying, into families far away. Why? Because if you get hit by a weather shock here, the family far away is not being hit, and they manage to share. And that's how we should think of the global economy.
That's
like you invest,
isn't it?
Yeah, invest abroad. Invest in Africa, diversify your portfolio, and then, whoever grows is helping everyone else grow.
We're almost out of time, so very quick sentence from you, Katie.
Yeah, so for me, it's really, I'll refer back to something I said earlier, but that's really moving from isolated action to systemic change. I really would love to see more collaboration and scaling of many of these initiatives to really impact more people. That's what it's all about.
Thank you. And Mavis, I'll give you the last sentence.
So invest in Africa's structural transformation. That's it.
Excellent. I think there's a lot of learnings here and some homework to do, but thank you to all the panelists today. It was really candid, insightful conversation. I think resilience isn't about future ambition. It's an immediate economic necessity. It's happening right now and we need to tackle it. So the question really is how quickly and how collectively we can move forward from discussion to delivery. But thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was a fantastic and very practical conversation, really, about skills partnerships, foundational learning, vocational training, and so on. And the sense of urgency as well that was conveyed by Mavis when she talked about a youth quake or the world's greatest opportunity, economic opportunity. So we are going to keep the energy going. Please do stay where you are. And I will very shortly be welcoming an honored guest to the stage. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready, and I now have the honour of welcoming to the stage the UK Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper.
Thank you very much, and it is a great pleasure to be able to welcome everyone here in London for the Global Partnerships Conference, and a huge pleasure especially to be able to co-host this conference with South Africa, just as our two countries worked together last year on the replenishment of the Global Fund, helping to secure over £11 billion in pledges to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. And it is a pleasure too to co-host with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and British International Investment, the pioneering organisations that have done so much to advance the priorities that we all share. This conference was designed to be a bit different from the normal international ministerial events that we hold. And so I just wanted to start by acknowledging the incredible range and depth of experience on expertise in this room and around this conference centre, from civil society, youth activists, major investors, philanthropists, tech entrepreneurs, experience of development past and ideas and interests for the future. The collective wisdom and insight that we need to harness together in the face of the most unprecedented global challenges. And I know that there's many individuals, organisations in this conference who have long-standing commitments to lifting people, communities and countries out of poverty. And we've seen huge progress as a result of that incredible dedication. Over 1.5 billion people worldwide lifted out of extreme poverty in recent decades. Healthy life expectancy around the world increased by over 5 years in just a decade. Over 100 million more children going to school, and nations benefiting from stronger job creation and growth. And as the British Foreign Secretary, I'm proud that the UK has played its part in that story of transformation, working with partner governments and with many of you here today. And as we look forward now, many of those same values that have underpinned that progress are enduring. Our sense of our shared humanity, that fundamental moral purpose to stand up against global disease and hunger, and to support those trapped in crises caused by conflict or climate change, and the deep distress we share at injustice and unfair inequalities that hold people back. But we are here today because we know that change is needed. Because we know we need to do things differently at a time when our world is more volatile, more contested, more unstable than ever, and when our multilateral system is under strain. And we meet against the backdrop of the Hormuz crisis, a strait of water through which 90 ships a day used to pass. But for the last 3 months, it's been more like 5. Heating oil for Asia, stuck in the strait. Fertilisers for Africa, stuck in the strait. 20,000 seafarers, 800 ships just stuck in the strait. The price effects felt on the other side of the world. The global economy is being held hostage, and the global south is paying the biggest price. It's affecting the planting season too. The agricultural clock is ticking. And damage is already being done that will affect crop yields and food prices well into next year. As the World Food Programme has warned, some 45 million people in the global south are at risk of being pushed into acute hunger this year. The world risks sleepwalking into a global food crisis. And we cannot risk tens of millions of people going hungry because Iran has hijacked an international shipping lane. And so that is why we need to act together in our response. The World Bank, the IMF, and other institutions have an unparalleled ability to deliver emergency finance at a scale that's needed to cushion the immediate impacts of the crisis. And with others, the UK has been using our voice and shareholder role to press for a step change in response, coordinated across the global financial system. We need faster coordinated action, multilateral development banks operating as a coherent whole, not just in parallel, aligned programming, quicker disbursement, specific support to fertiliser markets, working closely with UN agencies. And with the World Food Programme, we're already helping pre-position food supplies because we have to get ahead of the risks, not wait for the suffering to unfold before us. But aid can't operate alone. And that's why Britain has led diplomatic efforts to press for the immediate reopening of the Strait, convening partners to defend the principle of the law of the sea, and why we're preparing, alongside France, a multilateral maritime mission to reassure shipping and get trade moving when an agreement is in place, and supporting the negotiations to fully reopen the Strait free from restrictions and tolls, to get the global economy moving again. But the Hormuz crisis holds up a mirror to our wider challenges. It shows the importance of acting early and in partnership to mobilise support, the importance of political and policy responses to tackle the causes of crises, not just to mitigate their impacts, the importance of the rule of law, in this case freedom of navigation, for prosperity and development, not just for order and stability, and the urgent need to address the underlying weaknesses in our economic resilience and our precarious food and energy security. For us in the UK, that means first and foremost accelerating the clean energy transition. Instead of the fossil fuel roller coaster, the security, independence and economy of British-owned renewable energy. Because renewable energy can't get stuck in the Strait of Hormuz and can't be hijacked by hostile states. This is a choice we are making for ourselves, but it is also true for many other countries as well. And so, in responding to this crisis, we should be turbocharging that shift, and it's why I'm so pleased that we can announce today the BII's investment, the British International Investments, additional investment to deliver over £4.6 billion of climate investment in emerging markets to support the green transition and to build energy security too. But the reason that this matters is because the Strait of Hormuz is no outlier. Coming so soon after the energy price shock, the grain supply threats when Russia invaded Ukraine, or the supply chain crisis in COVID. This reflects a new era of geopolitics and geoeconomics, an era of global great power competition and global volatility, but also concurrent crises from conflict, climate, from communicable disease, where our interconnected world that has helped lift nations out of poverty and drive growth is turned against us to become a source of great vulnerability. At a time when violent conflict is on the rise around the world and greater than any time since the Second World War. And we've seen new levels and patterns of displacement and migration, tied also often to climate change as extreme weather and record temperatures destroy livelihoods. And also the new uncertainties from the pace of technological change, as AI, frontier technologies offer profound potential to give us new solutions around healthcare, around development, around economic growth, but also real risks of compounding global injustice and insecurity unless we respond. And of course, a multilateral system in need of reform, at a time when development budgets in many donor countries, including here in the UK, are under financial strain or facing reductions. So in the face of these challenges, bold new approaches are needed. And we need to be honest that as well as keeping up with changing times, we need to address some of the deficiencies in some of the traditional ways we've done development in the past. The external blueprints, the paternalism, the policies that increased dependency rather than building resilience, and the reflex to act for others rather than getting firmly behind local needs and priorities. So as part of the UK's response, we've held honest exchanges with partners about what we should do differently and heard clearly the need and the demand for greater voice and agencies for countries and communities to shape decisions that affect them, including global institutions and the global financial system. As Mia Mottley, the far-sighted Prime Minister of Barbados, has put it, seats at the table of decision-making where we can be seen, heard, become active agents in our own cause and lead our own development. And that lies behind the shifts that my friend and fellow Minister, Baroness Jenny Chapman, has been leading in our UK development approach, as she will have set out to you earlier this morning, moving from donor to investor, from grants to expertise, putting partnership and the focus on local needs at the centre of what we do, and putting those shifts hardwired into this conference today and tomorrow, because the framing is about partnerships, collective action on common challenges, on mutual respect, learning and accountability. And a joint document that is not about traditional aid pledges, but about focusing on mobilising finance, technology and new coalitions. And I want to pay tribute to Jenny and the FCDO team for bringing this event together. So let me just then highlight 3 areas of what this looks like. On development finance, shifting the centre of gravity from traditional measures around public funding towards mobilising much wider investment and different forms of capital investment and support. For example, developing local capital markets to attract and allocate finance effectively, as we've done in Ethiopia, through support to their first public stock exchange so that Ethiopian companies can tap into new funding. With the UK insurance sector pioneering new public-private partnerships that can help countries respond more quickly and effectively to natural disasters. And working through the most impactful bits of the multilateral system, such as the World Bank's International Development Association, where every pound we invest unlocks £4 of additional finance, whilst backing calls for the reforms of the global financial system, including by tackling unsustainable debt through expanding the common framework and making it meet countries' needs more quickly. We're backing too Africa's institutions to raise far more funding at scale, with our £650 million contribution to the African Development Fund helping leverage in up to £1.6 billion in grants and concessional loans, including issuing bonds on the London Stock Exchange for the first time. And moving into also providing expertise, such as the tax advice that has helped Ghana generate an additional £100 million in revenue to invest in its own education and health priorities, far more than a traditional UK aid programme could have provided. The second shift is to make sure we focus our humanitarian and grant aid on the countries and the communities that need support most. Conflict is now one of the biggest drivers of extreme poverty across the world. Already, over half of extreme poverty is concentrated in conflict-affected fragile states. And so alongside our allocations, aid allocations, to areas like Sudan and Lebanon, Palestine, we're prioritising conflict resolution in each of those areas too. A focus that also supports our interests because conflicts that rage unresolved radiate instability across regions and continents. And it's in our collective interest to support global health too, when we see the Ebola outbreak spread in and around the DRC, flagged by the WHO as being a clear international concern. And we also need a reset of the whole humanitarian system as proposed by UN Humanitarian Chief Tom Fletcher and organisations like the International Rescue Committee for rigorous prioritisation and shifting the power and resources to local partners that really understand the local contexts and needs. And UN reform too, to help the UN play its indispensable role to be more efficient, more effective and coherent, refocused on the core priorities and results in line with the UN 80 reform initiative. But finally, I want to mention a further focus that is about our values and also our shared interests, because amidst the plethora of global emergencies. We can risk neglecting one that blights the safety and prosperity, equality and freedom of half the world, including here in the UK. And that's why this government, the UK government, has made tackling violence against women and girls a national mission, setting an unprecedented mission, a push to halve violence against women and girls in the UK in a decade. But we believe it also needs to be a global focus. Because at a time when 1 in every 3 women and girls worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence, these are not simply these statistics, but lives scarred and generations that can bear those scars. And having heard firsthand on the Sudan-Chad border earlier this year in Adre, some of the most harrowing stories of rape and sexual violence, we know that that kind of violence can pass through and scar whole generations and communities for years to come. And so tomorrow, here at this conference, we will say more about our upcoming international coalition, an international campaign, and the new coalition we seek to build involving multiple countries here at this conference. So in closing, let me thank you for being here and for all the discussions and the conversations at this event. This part of London is no stranger to being the basis for international cooperation. We're holding this conference just a couple of miles from Greenwich's Royal Observatory, from which the world agreed how to measure time. And that agreement to create a single prime meridian unlocked cooperation on trade, on commerce, on global interactions. And here today, in a different time, on different terms, as an international community with states, companies, civil society all represented, we're discussing again the cooperation on the critical issues that will shape the coming decades, signing our jointly endorsed Global Partnerships Compact. And I hope this shared endeavour that will carry us forward, whether it's at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, the multilateral events, or into the UK's G20 presidency next year. Let me finish where I started, with the potential interest of all of those here from so many different countries and backgrounds to bring those partnerships across the world and across our communities together for a world free from poverty on a livable planet, because we know it's the partnerships that we build across the world that make each and every one of us stronger at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Friends, lunch is now served in the Workers' Yard. Please do take the time to explore the tech village and also the marketplace. There are some really fascinating innovators there who do want to show you what they're working on. We reconvene here at 1:30. So enjoy lunch.